Okay, good morning, everyone. What I'm going to attempt to do here is talk through the series of maps that we will be creating in preparation for studying for the midterm exam. Now, I want you to keep in mind that these maps will also be crucial in your preparation for the AP exam. And then also again for the final exam, which we will hold in class shortly after the AP exam. And it is actually an old AP exam or a combination of old exams. So keep a hold of these maps. We are not going to come back and redo these when we get ready to study the final. We're just going to talk through them instead. Now, it is your option as you're listening to this. If we have not already added notes in class, as I talk through this, you may add your notes that you see in red as well. The things that I have highlighted in yellow on this page are actually the things that are already copied onto your maps, so there's no need to copy those down again. However, you might want to use a highlighter and highlight those so that you can see where the big headings are, and then the information that you write. And I do recommend you writing it in a color, in pen. It's going to be very difficult to see if you're writing completely in pencil. You'll want to do that as well. Notice also that I've drawn the trade routes. So the physical trade routes are on this map, and they have all been added in blue. And then finally, down to the side here, one of the things I've added to these maps that I don't believe is on the copies I gave to you are the areas of the world that are being included on these maps. Now, I want to begin with this map because this is where we began the school year. And before I get into this map, I do want to preface this by kind of giving you a brief recap of the stuff you had done during your freshman year. And the reason I want to go back to that earlier period is because we have just finished studying the second major transition in human history, the Industrial Revolution. This is the second time that we see something happening that alters all aspects of human existence. The way we interact with the environment, the way we produce things, the way we run our governments, the way we interact with one another socially. So social, political, and economic changes occur because of the Industrial Revolution. And the last time that we saw that many radical changes happening was last year during your freshman year when you studied the Neolithic Revolution. So up until that point, people had been living in forager-hunter bands. So small, close-knit communities, often based on family or extended family units. After the Neolithic Revolution occurs, we have for the first time settled agricultural villages, and then those villages transform into city-states. And so the first half of your freshman year was really looking at how civilizations advanced and became much more complex with job specialization, government and religion starting to form, and things like that. So if you remember, those earliest river valley civilizations, they are very much predicated on this idea of human interaction with the environment. And that's what you want to remember about all of those. The second phase that you studied last year then was your classical civilization. So we're talking about Greece and Rome. We're talking about Han Dynasty China. And this is really for empires, the full form of empire building. Persia, for example, Gupta and Maurya civilizations in India. So these are your major civilizations when it comes to empires. And they really represent the full form of empire structure. What we pick up with in the summer assignment is those empires, but now beginning to transform into something else. And we're seeing the beginnings of a huge amount of interaction. Now, keep in mind, there had always been interaction in the old world, Afro-Eurasia, which you see here on the map. People had always been moving back and forth. I don't want you to think that people didn't move, ideas didn't spread. They absolutely did. But the extent, the rate, and the frequency at which that will occur, once we get to the summer assignment material and the first units, 12 and 13, that we studied, it's going to increase exponentially. So we're looking at a radical increase in the amount of interaction. And that, of course, is going to start to lead us into something new. Regional and trans-regional trade diasporas, of course, are going to figure prominently in here. So our larger, more extensive empires. But eventually we're moving towards something different, when we get to European exploration, when we get to nation building, when we get to political revolutions. So we're starting to see the beginnings during this early phase, the map that you see here. We're starting to see the beginnings from a transition from the old classical empires you studied last year to basically the modern world in which we live today. And what we started off with the school year studying was that transitional period. So let's begin with the summer assignment. If you remember, the summer assignment was on Islam and the expansion of the Islamic caliphates. You can see the information here in the center. And the Abbasid Caliphate, there were a lot of details about that that came out in the summer assignment. You want to know about the Sunni-Shia split. You want to know how that happened. You want to know about the invasion of the Mongols coming in, as well as before them, the Turks, the Seljuk Turks. And I'm not going to go over all of that information here. That's something that I want you to go back, look at, and refresh your memory. So you just want to take out the information that you had prepared for the summer assignment and take a look through that information. Now, what I do want to focus on a little bit more, however, and with just to go back for a moment, you can see here it says Abbasid Caliphate, but underneath it says see summer assignment. So just make a note there to see summer assignment, and you can go back and just briefly review that material. Don't spend a ton of time on that. Okay, you just want to refresh your memory of the basics, What I do want to spend some more time on, however, is down below the Muslim Golden Age and new technologies and new forms of empire that are going to be created by the Islamic societies of this period. You all know that I highly emphasize the importance of the Islamic world. And in the scheme of world history, the Islamic Golden Age is by far one of the most influential. What's so influential about this Islamic period is that the extent of their empire is going to be massive. So if you remember, and I'm going to talk through the stages here with you, that initially Muhammad is spreading his ideology through missionary work, but also through military. So we have the complex relationship between Mecca and Medina, which you can see indicated here. You can write military down below that in that region. Then he expands to the first thing for Islamic expansion is the Arabian Peninsula, and a lot of that has to be done militarily. Then Islam is going to spread into North Africa. And once it gets to North Africa, we're seeing a combination of, once again, military, of course, but also Sufi mystics, and then a little bit later trade. Now, the reason you have military being a major strategy in North Africa is that first, you have to remember who they're encountering in North Africa and what kind of society those people are. Here we're talking about the Berber traders. And the Berber traders are tribally based. And remember what we said about the southern part of the United States when the Spaniards tried to take over the southern part of that region, is that they encountered people who were very much tribal based as well, similar to the Berber traders here in Africa. And those types of groups that aren't used to living in an empire structure where there's a central government that controls things, often you're going to see a lot of fierce independence, and people are going to respond immediately by fighting back. So military became part of the strategy that the Muslims had to use as they were expanding into North Africa. However, in conjunction with that, you had Sufi mystics who were traveling as well. And the thing about the Sufi mystics, if you remember from the summer assignment, is that with mystical branches of any of the religions, which every major religion in the world has mystical branches, these mystical branches are much less concerned with the doctrinal beliefs and sometimes rigid doctrinal beliefs of the main religion. And they're much more about the experience of the religion. They're much more about talking with people about the big questions, like why are we here? What does this all mean? And that kind of less rigid, experiential type of religious sect is going to have a lot more success at converting people than people who are the mainstream religion and are going to come in and be like, well, oh, you want to convert to Islam? Okay, well, you need to do this, and this. Sufi mystics would be more like, and this is a generalization, of course, I'm kind of overstating things here, but a Sufi mystic would go in and be like, oh, you're interested in our religion? Okay, well, come to one of our events, let's talk about things. So they would be much more relaxed. And that kind of environment often is going to bring people into a religion. It's like a first step into the new religion. So they're going to have success, Muslims, as they move through North Africa, first militarily, but then second because of the activities of these Sufi mystics. Now, so Islam first spreads south and north throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Then it extends into North Africa. At the same time it's extending into North Africa, it's also, see this arrow here? It's also expanding out into Central Asia. And this is where they're encountering some of the Turkic people. Once again, very much tribally based societies. So here again, you're seeing the same strategies being used. Military strategies, but also Sufi mystics. Trade, yes, but a little bit later. Okay, so you have them spreading out from the center, going both east and west kind of simultaneously. Now you have the next phase. Once they're over in North Africa, you're going to see them pushing up into Christian Europe. Now remember what Europe is like at this point. The Roman Empire has fallen. Christian Europe is now in disarray, and the Muslims are going to be able to push up into Spain. They successfully conquer Spain, pushing the Christians back until, you might remember who actually stops them. This is the hammer, Charles Martel. So he stops the Muslim advance. But now the Muslims control Spain, and this eventually will launch a golden age in Spain, as there is much more tolerance and a spread of new ideas and intellectual developments as well. At the same time that they're spreading into Spain, you also see this eastern branch beginning to spread down into India, and then eventually through the Indian Ocean and over to Oceania. Now, the processes through which they are spreading their empire in these regions, still you see a little bit of military in India, of course, because you do have a lot of people who are settled there, going to fight back, not want this new invading force coming in. But you do see now new aspects of trade. Remember, this is the latter period. So by this point, the Muslims have kind of established themselves. They have a large empire already, and people are starting to see the advantages of actually joining this empire, particularly regarding trade. This is going to be the case in some parts of India, all throughout the Indian Ocean and Oceania, as well as these portions of Africa as they expand further south, not only into West Africa, but also, as you can see, the arrow points down here, into East Africa. Okay, and you can see how this is starting to lead into some of our trade diaspora material that we began the year with. So in those regions, these last stages of the Islamic expansion, we see trade figuring much more prominently than mystics and much more prominently than military. We don't see a lot of military being used here now at all because, as I said, people are beginning to see an advantage to joining this larger empire and converting to Islam, particularly traders and merchants. Now, those of you that had this question during the summer assignment, hopefully you'll remember why that was. For everyone, however, think about why if you're a trader in these other parts of the world, and for example, if you're down here in Srivijaya and you're a Hindu or a Buddhist, what advantage might you have from converting to Islam now that the Islamic empires have grown so large? Same thing is true over here for Africa. If you were part of the native religious beliefs, what benefit might there be in converting to Islam now that the Islamic caliphates have gotten so large? The obvious is that if you convert to Islam, now you can tap into this huge trade network that they have created, allowing you access to greater markets. Therefore, you can sell more goods, and the goal, of course, being that you can make more profit Do you see how this is the same logic as capitalism as well? And you see this operating within the trade diasporas. Still, the goal is to make as much profit as you can. But the way to do that during the trade diaspora period is to convert and tap into these religious trade diasporas that are controlling economics at this point in time. The other aspect that you have going on here as well, which is equally as significant, is that if you convert, now the Muslim traders who are coming into your region are going to consider you to be a fellow Islamic individual, and therefore potentially give you cheaper prices, access to a wider array of objects to trade, and so forth. So they will consider you now part of the group, and therefore begin to give you benefits over the people who are going to stay within their native religion, whether it be native animist religions in Africa, or Hindu or Buddhist religions in Southeast Asia and Oceania. Okay, so that's the expansion of Islam over time. So you'll notice here I have written the economic benefits of converting, the economic benefits of conversion. Make sure you get this information down on your maps as well. So finally, what's the big idea here? When the Arabs spread and create this huge empire, which incorporates parts of Africa, all of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, much of Oceania, when they are able to do this, they're able to take the knowledge that existed in all of those various parts of the world and for the first time spread them and share them throughout their entire empire. Remember, they create madrasas all throughout their empire, schools, where people are bringing together this knowledge, sharing it, building upon it. So if you'll remember, they do have battles with the Chinese, and they're gaining knowledge from the Chinese in those interactions. Well, they take that back and they spread it throughout the empire. This is where paper is going to be transferred to the rest of the world, knowledge of paper. Also knowledge of siege warfare and some other technologies in addition. From India, India is probably the most crucial interaction for world history at this point in time, the Islamic and Indian interaction, because from India we get early number theory, which is going to lead to the foundation of some of our modern mathematics, which allows so many more advancements when it comes to scientific discoveries. Really laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that we just finished studying. Not only do we get the mathematical and on top of that astronomical knowledge from this part of the world, but we also receive the largest migration of plants and animal life in all of world history prior to the Columbian Exchange. The thing about that is that you'll know about the environment of India that it is quite wet for parts of the year. You have the monsoons, which help with that. So what occurred when they tried to take the crops from this part of the world and grow them, for example, in the rest of their empire, you were taking wet weather crops and trying to grow them in a dry environment. Humanity is not one to kind of not try to do that, and they try to do that. It fails initially, but all they have to do then is develop new irrigation techniques in order to facilitate the growth of those crops in these parts of the world. And today, this is why we think of citrus being in the Mediterranean. Of course, it's not. It's originally an Indian crop. The same thing with cotton. We think of cotton being an Egyptian cot as well as Indian. Well, it was exclusively just in India initially. So you have the migration of all of these crops, which alter, on a smaller scale than the Columbian Exchange, but equally as important, alter the world as we know it. Over from North Africa, the Muslims are going to take a lot of the medical knowledge that had been developed there, spread that throughout the rest of the world. So you have them taking ideas from all of these different cultures that they are encountering, spreading them throughout the empire, and then with their schools and their investment in knowledge and the expansion of knowledge, they are going to then enhance those ideas. So the main point about this period is that the extent of the Arab caliphates is going to allow for the spread and sharing of both culture and technology. So a hugely important foundational period, and this is why we focus so much on it. You study it at the end of last year, we pick it up with the summer assignment, we talk about it throughout the entire first part of the school year, okay? Final thing about the Muslim Golden Age is the tolerance. So remember, they had dini status. And compared to Christian Europe, compared to other parts of the world, the Islamic world was the most tolerant of religious minorities, hands down. At one point, they invite Jewish diasporas to come back to Jerusalem. Most choose not to return at that point. Most have established themselves in other parts of the world, have created communities, but the Muslims invite them to come back. Highly tolerant. In addition to that, Jews, Christians within the Islamic world are allowed to have positions in the government. They are allowed to continue to practice their own religions, and they become quite prominent and wealthy individuals throughout the empire. So highly, highly tolerant because of this dini status. Now, remember the flip side, though, of dini status. What did it entail? It was, for all intents and purposes, a second-class citizenship, so that you did have certain things that you could not do. For example, you could not attempt to spread your religion within the empire. You could practice it if you were already a Christian or a Jew, but they did prohibit you doing any type of missionary work to expand your religion. They made you recognize that, yes, you were living in an Islamic society and that they wanted you to respect the dominance of Islam. So by today's standards, that could be looked at as very much second-class citizenship. But at the same time, I need you to remember what the rest of the world was like. For example, when the Christians take back Spain from the Muslims, you only have two choices. You convert to Christianity or you die. In the Islamic world, you had three. You convert, you fight and probably die, or you choose to continue to practice your religion, but with this dini status. So do you see how this is a much more tolerant thing than we have anywhere else in the world at that time? So that's the last thing that I want you to remember about the summer assignment. I'm going to stop there, and we will pick up with the school year that we began with this year, chapter 12 and 13, and I'll come back to these maps at that point.